there.
Okay. This is great. Thank you for inviting us into the house here. And I drove by my mother's old home on 48 Chapman.
Yes.
And where did you live compared to that?
I lived one block away on William Street, 120 William Street.
120 Williams. So that's going towards the hospital.
Yes. No, it was down Baker Street, right
Baker
next to
Street.
it. Yeah, Williams and Baker Street.
Got it. And tell me about what did your dad do for a living?
My dad owned the Brooklyn restaurant with a partner.
And
The
who was
Brooklyn
partner,
restaurant
by the
and the
way?
Brooklyn Square.
Okay. And did he come over here from Albania?
He came from Albania when he was 17 years old. His father was mayor of our village in Albania. And the Turks had come from the mountains and killed him. And being my dad was the oldest son, they told him that he should go to America. So he married my mother, one of those arranged marriages, because they were neighbors. At 17 years old, left her with his mother. And he came to America. He made 2 trips back to Albania. My sister was born, and I was born in Albania. He came for us when my sister was 7 and I was 2. And so that was May 1930.
May 1930 is what day is that? When you came here or when you were born?
That's the day we came to America.
Because I bet you were born in around 1927.
Yes, I was born on September 1st, 1927.
And what's the name of your sister?
Thamida Demas. She's Demas. She married Louis Demas.
Okay. And that's the Brooklyn restaurant, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
And so your dad came over. Why did he come here? Where did he go to in America? Did he come to Jamestown?
He came to Jamestown. Many of the Albanian men had left their families in Albania till they could raise money to be able to bring them here. And so they lived together in apartments. And his first jobs was riding the elevator at Hotel Samuel's, bartending at different places, till they were able to save enough money, cleaning different restaurants, till they were able to save enough money to bring their families. And we lived in the house right across from the Greek church. It was Mr. Aristades, am I pronouncing that right? He lived in that house. We lived there for 1 year, and then he bought the house. My father bought the house on William Street. And that was where my brother Joseph was born. And it was the 3 of us.
So the family was the 3 of you, plus your mom and dad.
Just the 3 of us and my mother and father.
Yeah.
We lived on the first floor. We rented the 2nd floor of the apartment, so he would be able to pay for the house. And I remember I grew up there, went all through school there, and
where did you go to grade school?
we went to Charles Street School,
Okay.
and then we went to Lincoln, and then Jamestown High School.
Tell me about my mother. Tell me about Gladys.
Oh, Gladys, I met her when we were up. I think, I'm not sure if she went up to Charles with me, but she went to Lincoln School with me. And I used to walk home with her, leave her off at the corner of her house, and then walk the other half block to my home. We enjoyed doing so many different things together, and all my school years, junior high school and high school, we were very close. And your father, Lyle, too. I knew him well. I knew both of them well. There were so many of the girls that we all lived around that area. And sometimes we used to walk across the Jamestown General Hospital lawn. And sometimes she came down. The Jamestown General, they had tennis courts built in the behind the Jamestown General Hospital. There were 3 courts there. And your mother used to come down and play tennis with me.
You're kidding.
No, we used to play tennis. So a lot of the my friends that we got together, that's where we would meet. Sometime when it was so busy, we had to go to City Hall and get a permission to play tennis down there. But that's where many of us met each other, and also from our church. And so I have very fond memories of your mother and father. I do.
Talk about the church. Now, when you got here, the well, let's see, you were here in 1930. The St. Nick's Greek Orthodox Church existed. Did also the Albanian church exist as well?
No, there was only one Orthodox church, and that was the Greek Orthodox. And that's where we attended. My father and mother could both speak Greek. When we lived in Albania, in a small little village, we were very close to the border of Greece. The schools in Albania, they were Greek schools, Greek churches. So that's where we grew up, a Greek Orthodox. And I remember going to the Greek church when I was 5 years old, and my mother took us every Sunday. Being that my father had the restaurant, sometimes they were open on Sundays too at that time, and he had to work. But I went to church with her at the Greek Orthodox.
Now, the Greek Orthodox Church, that if we went there now, is still there on Chapman, right?
Yes.
Can you describe the church? When you walk up the stairs and into it, what do you remember about that?
I remember in the Greek church that all of the men sat on one side of the church, and the woman sat on the other side. They didn't sit together. The woman kept the children with them.
What were the men doing that was so?
That was from the old country. That was their tradition. So that's what they did. I remember that, and I always questioned that. Why do they do that?
And you got no answer.
No, they just told me that's the way it was in old country. But I remember that. I don't remember all of the Greek families, but there were more Albanian families members than there were Greek.
And this is the church, right?
That's right. That's the church.
Okay.
And when we went in, it was very small inside. All the men sat on the left side and the women were on the right hand side. And we had a small hall downstairs, small little kitchen, a little hall. And after I got married, no, I'm going to tell you first how the Albanian church started.
Sure.
When a lot of the businessmen that were attending the Greek Orthodox Church, the Albanian businessmen, they wanted the children to be able to understand the service in their language, because we all grew up knowing our Albanian language, besides being American. My father said, "You're in America now, and you are going to speak American only in the house." But we still spoke Albanian with my mother. So the businessmen got together, pooled their money, and they built an Albanian church. And it was on Sprague Street. Small little church on Sprague Street. So that split the the Albanians, not all the Albanians wanted to leave the Greek Orthodox Church. That was their church. They weren't going to leave. But the ones that did, we went to the Greek. And that was my father. So I attended the Albanian church then. And I was in my teenage years at that time.
So the sermon, would that be in English? Or the Albanian
It would
church?
be in Albanian.
Albanian, okay.
And the Greek service was in Greek.
Okay.
And they didn't have the books then that they had both languages in there, Greek and American, like they do now. So the children could follow it in both.
Yeah.
It was all Greek. So, but when I got married, my father said, now you're marrying an Albanian boy that goes to the Greek church and his family. You go where your husband goes.
So he was okay.
So I went back to the Greek church,
Okay.
and that's where I raised my 3 children.
And did your dad stay at the Albanian church?
My dad stayed in the Albanian church.
What about your mother? Same
My
thing?
mother, she didn't want to leave the Greek church, but that's what she did with her husband. And so my mother became ill after a while, and my father had a very hard time for a while with my mother, and she had to go to Gwanda State Hospital. So she was on and off there for over 20 years. So us 3 children, we practically raised ourselves. So we were living on Wyndham Street then, and when I met my husband Chris, he owned the Constantine Community Creamery down on the corner of Chapman and Baker. And my father said, a nice Albanian boy bought a grocery store. We've got to help him out. So he would send me down there for groceries. Before that, we used to go to Elmer's store, which was on Sprague Street. And all I remember, his name was Elmer. He taught my father how to drive. And I remember my father pulling up on Wyndham Street with a brand new black Ford. That was his first car, our first car on Wyndham Street. So when we got married, my father said he let the people that lived upstairs of us, he asked them to move out because he wanted me and my husband to move upstairs. So my father was living downstairs. My brother was in the Korean War. We raised our 3 children upstairs. And after my father passed away, we moved back downstairs. So I was in that house for many years.
I don't think we have on the tape, but what was your maiden name?
Joka.
How do you spell that?
We came through Ellis Island, and my name was really Jokalati. But when they changed a lot of the names and cut off a lot of the names at Ellis Island, so they shortened it to Joka. So all of our passports and everything was under Joka. And I didn't have my own passport. We were under my father's passport. But after I got married, my husband Chris told me, you should have your own passport, your own citizen papers. So I went to Mayville, my sister and I, and we got our own citizen papers. So, because he was afraid if I didn't have my citizen papers, maybe I would be shipped out. So he thought I should have my American citizen paper, my own papers.
So in the 30s and 40s, the Albanians, the Greeks, they're pretty much very much a minority here in Jamestown.
Yes, they were.
Were you treated any differently? Was there any sense that because your parents immigrated from Albania, that anybody?
We got along all with both Greek and Albanians. They all got along real well. But when the men came out of the service, that's when they got to meet us, with the Albanian boys, and they married a lot of the girls, either from the Albanian church or from the Greek church. And that's where they raised them all. We raised our children from the Greek church more.
Yeah.
But after we married, we met the boys, and what can I tell you?
Well, I'll tell you something. I have a movie, a 1941 movie in color of baseball being played in Allen Park. Maybe you've seen it, but it's a very, really well done movie. And there, sitting on the bench at this baseball game at Allen Park, is one Chris Constantine. I don't know if had you seen that?
I've seen the picture.
Well, there's a video of that. I will make sure that they get it so you can see that. But I know I showed it to Chris at some point along the way. So when did you two get married?
We got married in 1951.
Okay.
And my son Tom was born in 53, and my son Mark was born in 54, and my daughter Christina was born in 58. After my son Mark was born, after the 3 years, Chris asked me, "Do you want a girl?" And I said, "I certainly do." So that's why I got Christina.
I just had that happen. So
Just like that.
Chris
Wasn't I lucky?
decided, and that's it.
Wasn't I lucky? It was a girl. The best thing that happened to me.
That's right. Well, she agrees. So do you, Greg, right?
Oh, yeah.
The best thing that
Jump in anytime, Greg.
Best,
Yeah.
best move she
I
ever
always
made.
tell her she was the best thing that my husband gave me,
Back to the
beside
church,
my two sons.
back to the churches. Do you remember who was the minister, the priest at the Albanian church? What was his name?
It was Father Lowley. Yeah, Father Lowley. And I was choir director there for 2 years when I was 17 and 18 years old. I was 23 when I got married, but when I met Chris, I was 19, and he said I didn't want to get too serious about you because I had to pay off the store. So that's why the 3 years, we started a date for 3 years, but he didn't get serious till he proposed to me in 51, till we got married in 51. I wanted to tell you that I remembered walking over from the old church to the new church. My sons were altar boys, both Tom and Mark, beside many of their friends. I remember George Petro, Verlaine. Oh, there were quite a few altar boys at that age because they were all born at that same time. I remember walking across the lawn to the new church. We fathered Father Kuklis. We had Father Kuklis at that time. When Reverend Janethus passed away, we had 2 or 3 different priests. I remember Father Mentis, and then I can't remember the second one, but I remember Father Kuklis is the one that led us over to the new church. When I walked up those steps of the new church, we followed Father and the altar boys. When I walked in that church, I thought it was just a palace. It was beautiful, beautiful. here was our little church that, fit just about, 25 people. And I thought it was the most beautiful sight in the world. When I think about it now, I get tears in my eyes about how all of the parents had gotten together and all the businessmen to build such a beautiful church for both the Greek and Albanians. We were very close. All the families were all very close together. They would visit. Our tradition was celebrating name days instead of birthdays.
Okay.
So we would visit on name days. You weren't invited. You just went up to any home, of the Albanian home or Greek home, on their name day. And they served you little glasses of whiskey for the men and the coffee and the little coffee cups. And I'll show them to you after a while. I've got a lot of coffee, little black Turkish coffee for all the women. And I remember I was 7 years old and I had to walk around to the company with my tray with a little shot of whiskey. Well, those men would set up and rig that whiskey all one shot. And I remember serving them the coffee for the women.
Was it a special whiskey? Was it anything unique?
Ouzo.
Ouzo.
The name of it was Ouzo. That was the Greek whiskey, right?
The celebratory drink.
Yeah.
Yes,
Yes.
I've had that, yes.
Yeah. It was a white. So, a lot of those memories.
Well, tell me about that day in particular. The day when they actually, what year was that? Do you roughly remember when that was?
When what was it?
When you moved from the old church on Chapman across the lawn to the
No,
new
I
church.
can't tell you exactly the year.
Was there a service at the old church, kind of a saying goodbye church service, and then
Yes,
walk
there
across?
was a service there before we went into the new church. Yes.
And so there's a service, and Father Kuplas, then with all the robes and stuff.
All the robes.
I can visualize all of a sudden there's
All the altar boys had robes on.
and they just march across into the new church. Was there a service there?
Yes, we did.
Okay.
We had a service there too.
And the service at that time was still in Greek, right?
Yes.
So everybody came, and then they had this big service at the new church. Then I suspect there was a reception afterwards. Was there something afterwards where everybody celebrated?
Well, we had a big hall, in our church, compared to our little hall in the old church. So yes, of course, they had a reception.
And was it a community event? Did the politicians and other people come to that event, or was it just really for the church?
I think it was only for the church. I can't remember that well if there was any outside. I can't remember that at all.
Did the Albanian church members join you in that celebration?
Many of them did, yes, because we kept friends with them. I mean, they separated. It wasn't separated for friendship. It was just separated for the church, so they would be able to understand. So the children would be able to understand it in their language. But as they stayed friends always, like I told you, they visited their homes and they always stayed friends.
Do you remember when the services, or the discussion, when the services decided they were going to be more English? They go from just a Greek service to all of a sudden there's some English. Was that difficult for some people?
I think for the older people it was. Yes, I think for the older people it was. But when the new books were printed, where they're both in English and Greek, it helped so much for the younger people to be able to understand it. And I still to this day I follow my book in church. I follow it, And of course, my hearing isn't that well right now. So I follow the book so I don't forget it. I know so much of it by heart. But I still follow our book in the church. I love our Orthodox religion. People tell us it's so much like the Catholic, but we aren't. The Catholic people think that our religion is an awful lot like the Catholics, but we aren't. There are certain things that we were taught as children to believe in our religion, and that was our creed, and of course, we said our Lord's Prayer, which is in every church, so the children learned the Lord's Prayer. Sunday school started in the new church, and all these young mothers, and I was one of them, we became volunteer teachers. We took turns, and we made sure that they had a Sunday school so they could learn the books of the Bible, so they could learn the Lord's Prayer, so they could learn the 23rd Psalm. So we taught them things from the Bible that they wouldn't have learned if they were just attending the church. So my husband had the grocery store, and he opened it every Sunday morning, so he was there 9 to 1. They had the papers were used to be delivered to him, and the funnies, so people picked up the newspapers from the store, so he had to be there 9 to 1. But I took my 3 children to church every Sunday, and I taught Sunday school on the days that I was supposed to be teaching them. And the children grew up then with the books of the Bible and learning of the Bible, the American Bible. So, which I always am so thankful that we were able to have so many of the young mothers being able to teach them.
Before you had Sunday school facilities at the new church, if you wanted to have Sunday school classes in the old church, where was it there, or did you go to St. Luke's?
When I was, I think, about 10 years old, there was a girlfriend that I went to school with up at Lincoln that I met earlier. Her name was Paula Seberg. And she wanted us to go to her church Sunday school. And that was Brooklyn Heights Sunday School on Sprague Street, Hull Street. Yeah. So I went to Sunday school there for 3 years. I didn't miss a Sunday for 3 years, and I earned my Bible from them. There were about 4 of us Albanian girls that went there. Alfreda Chully was one of them that lived on Baker Street. And it was my cousin, Eftelikasakis, which was my father's partner's daughter, one of the daughters. Anyway, they wanted us to join the church, but I said, no, I have to go to my own church after Sunday school. So I went to the Albanian church at that time, not the Greek. But I attended Sunday school at the Brooklyn Heights. And I did learn so much more. I learned all the songs that Brooklyn Heights had. Onward Christian Soldiers. Sure. I could mention so many of the music that I learned from them, which we didn't learn from the Greek church, Albanian church. Yeah. I don't know how I became choir director in Albania Church, but nobody wanted the job, I guess, and I knew the service well enough where I followed in the booklet. So, but I loved the Sunday school at Broken Heights.
Yeah.
Yeah, I loved the church.
I'm just curious. My mother used to talk about how she used to go occasionally to the Greek church for usually Easter Sundays and stuff like that. Do you remember any of that? Do you remember her coming over there?
No, I don't.
Yeah.
No, I can't tell you. I can't tell you honestly that I remember that.
No, because it just happened to be there, across the street. So some of the priests that you had during the time period, after Father Genethus and then Father Kuklas and then...
Father Mentis.
Okay.
But I can't remember. There was another one. I don't know. I really can't remember who the other one was.
And there's Father Nick. Is it Raphael?
Yes.
Raphael.
Yeah.
Yeah. What was he like?
Father Nick, I liked him very, very much. Naturally, I loved our priests. All our priests were very, very humble, and he had a fine family. He came to every one of our Ladies' Society meetings. He encouraged the children. He encouraged the boys to become altar boys. He worked very hard for the church. I was a member all the time that he was there. I've been a member since Father Genethus. I didn't tell you where I got married.
No, please.
Being that I was a member of the Albanian church and my husband was a member of the Greek church, and because I wanted some of it in English for all my friends, I got married in St. Luke's Episcopal Church. I had to get special permission from their reverend.
Was it Father O'Prey?
Yes. And Father, I had 3 priests. I had Father Genethus, Reverend Lowley, and Father Father Palace from Buffalo. I invited him because he did a lot of the service in English. I don't know if I was a stubborn girl or what, but I wanted my friends to be able to come and enjoy the service and to understand it. And I wanted both my friends and relatives from the Albanian church and my husband's family from the Greek church, I wanted them to be comfortable and to be in a neutral territory. So I told my father that's what I wanted to do. So he gave me permission to do that.
Wow, good for you. Good for you.
I think I was the only girl that did that.
I'm just going to say, because that's, what's it different? You negotiated that very well. That's
Well, I'll
that
tell
wasn't
you,
easy.
there was a girl, an Albanian girl, who belonged to the Albanian church, Ramona Ford. And she was a member of the St. Luke's Episcopal Church. And she arranged a lot of it for me. She got me to meet Father O'Prey. And I explained to him what I wanted to do to get special permission. And we had our rehearsals. They opened the church for me, the organist. So that was my story when I got married in 51.
Well, just to tie in you and me a little bit more, Father O'Prey's son is Dennis O'Prey.
Yes.
And he went into the ministry. And Dennis O'Prey married my cousin Lynette Carlson, who was my mother's. Henry was the oldest in my mother's family. That's
Yes.
the daughter there. So the whole O'Prey family was just here, Lynette and Dennis. And I'll tell them that you were unique. in the history of St. Luke's Church.
You know, I wanted to tell you, your uncle, Henry, was my science teacher in Lincoln School.
Phil.
Phil.
Yes, Phil, yes.
Yeah, excuse me.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I knew Henry too, but Phil. And I used to walk home sometime with him too. He found out I lived on William Street, so we used to walk home sometime with him too, with your mother.
Well, he went on to be a big-time medical doctor in the Navy.
Did he?
Yeah, he went to the Pentagon, and he was very high up there.
Really
He was a
wonderful.
captain-
I
captain
never
Phil.
knew that. I
Yeah.
never knew that.
Well, because of the experience you gave him.
He was a very good teacher.
Wow, that's a small world department here. We're really connected.
It's a small world, isn't it?
It really is. What were some of the when you were growing up as a young mother in the Greek Orthodox Church? What were some of the things that you would do? Special holidays, Easters, name days, those things you just mentioned. But what are special events in the life cycle of a church that you remember?
Well, I remember on our name days that our names were read out loud by the priest, and I remember our Sunday school teachers now putting on Easter eggs hunt for the children. I remember Christmas, how it was so important it was for all the children to think of other children who were unable to have everything that our children had. And I remember them putting on pageants, putting on Christmas pageants. And I remember how we had to think back about our own grandparents and what they went through and everything, all the years, without having everything that we were, how lucky we were to be in America and to have everything. Our children were raised with the love of their grandparents, the love of their church, with the love of the children, and with the love of all their friends. We raised our children that way. A good friend is just as important to you as a relative. Could be closer to you. So I always raise my children, always telling them, keep your friends close. My father was a very affectionate, very wonderful man to going through what he did in his young life and what he went through to raise us. And I wanted to tell you too, I forgot to tell you that I remember you asked me what else I remembered about the church was our picnics. Mm. We always had our church picnics at the Greek grounds in Salran.
Yeah.
That's where we had every year. And I enjoyed them so much. Our men would get up early in the morning and they'd roast the whole leg of lamb. And they used to cut up the pieces of the lamb and put boxes that would sell to all the members who would come to the picnic. They would put a piece of lamb, they would put a scallion, a roll, and a banana. And I remember sitting in the field with other boys and girls. We were sitting on the field in Sauron on the lawn there, eating from these little baskets. And all of the members of the church, there were tables set up in the wooded area, and everybody would share the food that they brought. so much of the pies. The Spanish pies were passed from table to table, and how everybody shared the foods at those picnics. But that's a memory, that's a very strong memory for me as a child, how much I enjoyed those picnics. And our children now are enjoying the picnics that we're having at our church now. And my great-grandchildren. I'm such a lucky woman because I have two beautiful grandsons. My daughter and my son-in-law, Greg, gave me two beautiful grandsons, and they gave me four beautiful great-grandchildren. I couldn't ask for a better son-in-law than Greg. My sons didn't give me any children. They're both married, and they're very happy, but they weren't able to have children. My son Mark, once he went away to school, he went to JCC, and then he went to Albany State. My son Tom said, save your money and give it to Mark because he wants to go to college. I don't. So Tom graduated from Jamestown High School, but then he started working. He worked for different places. Mark graduated from Albany State, and he is now a director of student affairs in North Mankato in Minnesota, in a state college. He's done very well with his life. For 17 years, he was assistant director at William and Mary College in Virginia before he went to Minnesota. So he's spent his academic life in just the way he wanted to.
Sure.
Now my son Tom owns a Cherry Lounge in Jamestown. He's done very well. He's very happy. He has a wonderful wife, Dawn, and they work together to keep their restaurant going. My daughter has been my lifeline. She has been the closest to me because she was always there for me. And she's always there for me now. She went to JCC, and she didn't want to go further to school. She got a job at the post office in Jamestown as a young girl. And she worked there evenings until her husband Greg told her, you're not going to work evenings anymore because I want you to have a morning job to be morning. They got married, and she worked in the Postal Service for 40 years. And now that she's retired, she babysits and she takes care of me. I live alone in my house. We bought this house in 1969. I've lived in this house for 1969. When we were on William Street, the children were getting older, and I told my husband, I think we have to get out of this house. The boys were in bunk beds, and I had one child up at Lincoln School, one at the high school, Tom High School, and Christina was at Purcell School. So I started going around with different realtors, and I found this house. We bought it. I showed it to my husband on a Wednesday. We bought it on a Friday, and I showed my children on Saturday.
Yeah.
1969. So I live here alone, but not alone really, because I have my family. And I do the best I can. I'm 92 years old now, and I hope I can be here a little longer to enjoy my great-grandchildren longer. I want to thank you for coming, Greg.
My honor.
And for my children, and for Todd, and for Elizabeth, and for my daughter to come into my house and interviewing me. I didn't know this interview was going to be about my life. I thought it was just going to be about what I knew about the church. So I appreciate very much for your patience listening to me. Naturally, I could have told you a lot more about things that happened to my life and with my mother, but we grew up happy because of my father being the strong person he was. So thank you so much for interviewing me today.
Do you remember December 7th, 1941? Do you remember Pearl Harbor?
Yes, I do.
What do you remember about it?
What do I remember about it? I remember listening to it on the radio. We had a little radio. And I couldn't believe that somebody like that would invade our country. And when I found out that all the boys were enlisting, Chris, my husband, enlisted in the Navy. And he was only 19 years old, enlisted in the Navy. And his four brothers did too. 3 brothers. I knew that the country was going to be, in many years, in very, very hardship. In my class in high school, we were the only class that had all the 4 years of war. Now, we were short of paper. We were short of many things at the high school that we weren't able to give because of the war time. I remember that. But I remember our church giving different dances and dinners when our boys came home, so that we would get to meet each other. So they were thinking too that the boys and girls should get to meet each other, and it worked out well because so many married into each other, with each other.
Did it change any of the services? Did you get any sense of, here you're at the Greek Orthodox or the Albanian church at the time. It's pretty, you're speaking Albanian. Was there patriotism going on in the churches? Do you remember any of that going on? Was that part of a normal?
Oh, yes, I do. I do remember that. I remember my mother-in-law hanging up her gold star in the window, 4 of them. Her sons were spread all over. 2 of them were in the Navy and 2 were in the Army. And when one got out of the Navy, he joined the Army. But I remember her talking so much and how she used to cry and wish they'd come home safe. I remember the prayers that we had in church for our boys. I wish I could remember more about it, what we did. I worked at the Jamestown General Hospital as a nurse's aide. We were called Pinky Girls because they were short of nurses. And that was the summer after I graduated. I was still 17 years old. And I worked for 2 years as a Pinky. I helped the nurses because they were so short, helping making bread, making the beds, and delivering the food carts. So that's a lot of what I remember because of the war effort.
Do you remember rations? Do you remember food rations, gas rations, those things?
Oh yes, I do remember the gas rations because I remember my father tried to walk he walked to work many years, and he didn't have a car like I told you. He didn't get a car for till we were till I think I was 12 years old when he got his first car. Well, he would walk to work, but I remember the gas. I remember the market down on Market Street, and we would go in there. And the different what it called, the different men that owned the stalls, and there were a couple of Greek men that had the stalls had the vegetable stalls down on in the market, and how they would when the children would go in there, they would give us a banana or something, but I remember we did. I can't remember starving as myself, or well, we gave up. Because my father owned a restaurant, remember? But I can't remember what we did without.
One of those stalls there in Brooklyn Square was my grandfather, Carlson's Food.
Oh, yes, I remember.
It was meat stuff.
I remember.
Similarly, we were given hot dogs rather than wieners. We were given instead of bananas.
I remember.
It's the difference between the vegetable part of it and the meat part of it. Questions you might have. This is your chance. What are we missing, Christine? What's the story she's always told you that she hasn't told us?
No, I was waiting for the wedding story. That was that was a good one. Yeah, I don't.
When I worked at Jamestown General Hospital, I got a job at the Nelton's department store. So I worked there until I got married. And when I got married, at that time, the woman quit their job and stayed at home to raise their children and take care of them. So I wish I had stayed on, because with our grocery store, really, I don't know how my husband raised my 3 children and took care of me in the grocery store. But he went to work after we had the store for 17 years. And then he went to work at Marlin Rockwell, a couple of other factories, so that he could to be able to make to get us, to live. So I didn't work after I got married until I'm trying to remember the date, but a girlfriend of mine worked at the Blue Cross and Blue Shield Company. I was walking through town one day, and she stopped me. She said, "You want a job? We need a girl at the Blue Cross." She set up my appointment at Blue Cross on a Wednesday. I was hired right away. I started work that Friday. I worked at Blue Cross Insurance Company for 17 years.
Wow.
So until they moved to Buffalo. And then I got a job at Bigelow's department store. And I worked for Harry Klein at Lucy's store. And that's where I retired after a while. I didn't work. So I worked at Bigelow's, I worked at Lucy's. And after that, I didn't work anymore.
You know, Greg and I, we played softball together. Do you know he was on the dark side for a while?
No, I didn't know that.
You did.
I didn't know that.
My early years of softball, yes. What do you remember about the Balkan dances?
Oh yes, the Balkan dances.
What can you say? What can you share with us about that?
That's what I said. That's what the churches put on those Balkan dances, so that we would get to meet the men that came home from the service.
But later on, when I first started dating Christina, that was a pretty big deal.
Yes, it was. We looked forward to those dances.
It was a pretty big. I mean, it was pretty well attended in the
Yes,
Crystal
they were.
Ballroom out there. What are your memories of that?
Well,
we had a band, right? We had a band.
I'll tell you, I was a shy girl. I remember being
She's not remembering that.
They were held at different places, and I can't even remember the places where they were held.
Well, later on, when I came onto the scene, they were at the Crystal Ballroom,
Yes,
and we had a band.
yes.
And any memories about that era when I was there and all the families that were there? Do you remember anything about that?
No, all I remember is attending. I don't remember.
Yeah.
I remember we attended all of them. We never, we always remember attending.
So what'd you think of this guy?
I think the world of my son-in-law,
In the
Greg.
beginning?
Well, I got her fooled, didn't I?
In the beginning? What'd you think? I mean, sometimes it takes a while.
I'm going to tell you a little story about Greg.
Good. I want to hear.
Be careful.
When he was dating Chris, my daughter, there was a boy, I'm not going to mention his name, but he liked Christina, but he would, they were really good friends. And he used to take a walk in the neighborhood, and he stopped to see Christina. Well, one day, Greg came up to the house, and he saw this young man sitting at the kitchen table with Christina. He took one look. He said, well, he said, if you're going to start seeing somebody else, he turned around and walked out.
Nice. Puts on a show. Nice.
But I do remember that
Immature.
my daughter went to the high school prom with his brother. And Greg drove them in his car. And he asked his brother, do you mind if I date Christina? No, he said, because we're good friends. So that's when Greg asked Christina out. Those are two memories of me when
How about when I
first.
came up to the door and I asked if I introduced myself, and I said, you might know my mother.
Yes. Betty and I went all through school together also. And was it Chautauqua that you were living in? On Chautauqua. That was,
Howard Street.
yes, yes. And she used to come down to Baker Street and meet me, and we used to cross the Jamestown General Hospital and walk to school together. So her name was Betty Van Adder. And when Greg told me, you know my mother, Betty Van Adder, I went all through school with her. So it was a small world. Like we said, it was a small world that I knew his mother all through my life. And here we were lucky enough to join the two families together.
So that's Greg dropping the mother card. I like that.
Yes,
This has been fabulous. You're terrific. What a memory you have.
I've lost a lot of the memory, though. There are certain people and names, I've forgotten names. But as far as my memory about my children and everything, I'll never forget. Greg has two wonderful sons and their family, and I give a lot of the credit to Christina and Greg for raising those two fine boys and raising their children. I'm a very lucky woman to have had such wonderful parents, to have such wonderful church to attend, to have such wonderful friends all these years that we've been friends. And I would still say Greg's mother is still one of my closest friends. So that's what life is about.
Well, you make it special. Thank you for sharing all this. Thank you,
And-
Todd. Anything else for the good
And
of the cause?
thank you, Mr. Peterson, for coming
Mr.
to my
Peterson.
home. Greg,
Where's your dad? Right?
I'm so glad to have seen you in my home after all these years of knowing your mother and dad,
Yeah.
too.
Hey, I gotta tell you, all I heard about these Constantine all the time, And so I know that my mother would occasionally pull you folks together to have, dinner, lunch, whatever it happens to be.
That's
So
right.
She was very fond of those experiences here at going across the street from 48 Chapman over to the church and to get to meet you folks. So you have a special spot. So specifically today, when Alexis suggested that she was going to we had availability of you, that we got your agent to say it was okay. I raised my hand and says, I want to do this one. So because of you.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that.
On my half of the family, I thank you for putting up with my mother. That was the best.
No, I loved your mother.
Yeah, I say that sometimes.
Thank you.
Did
Thank
you know
you.
your mother played tennis?
No.